Welcome to this week's episode of Fishbowltales. The topic of today's video is going to be hardware and fasteners. So let's take a look at what we've got here. Let's talk about what we've used over the course of our build, and we'll go in depth about all of the parts and pieces and tools that I've built to make this job easier. So I am no stranger to hardware. I've got more of it than probably a lot of people you know. Each of these organizers here contain an assortment of hardware. This one here is all 1/4 20 hardware. This one here is all 1/2 13 hardware. Everything ranges from about 3/4 of an inch all the way up to 5 inches. So we've got a giant assortment. Both of these encapsulate taps and drills and nuts and washers and everything that you would need to join something together using these 2 diameters of fastener. And we have used a ton of this stuff in the bus. Every single point that the frame rail attaches to that bus and something is joined together, something that we needed to be heavy duty and strong, uses a piece of 1/2 inch hardware. All of the small accessories that attach to the frame rail or to the radiator or to the engine bay in some way, shape, or form use a smaller piece of the 1/4 inch hardware. Now there's also 3/8 and 5/16 hardware mixed in there everywhere in the engine bay of this bus, but this is the bread and the butter. So let's talk briefly about where you buy something like this. So we've used so much hardware over the course of this build, I found it really expensive to go online and use resources like McMaster Car or MSC to buy all of this hardware. The best resource that I've found to date has been Tractor Supply, believe it or not. I know they're pretty common across the United States. We have one right here in town, and you can buy grade 8 hardware in bulk, which is awesome. So I can go in there and I can buy 3 pounds of 1/2 inch hardware and spend, maybe $5 on all of it, versus going out and spending $5 on one individual piece of hardware that I've needed, especially on the really long bolts that I bought. Like, I have hardware in here that goes all the way through the frame rail. I mean, that's like a 5.5 inch 1/2 inch bolt. I mean, that thing by itself is probably a few dollars if you were to go online and buy it from a supplier, versus going to Tractor Supply and buying them in bulk, and they are just so much cheaper. It'll save you a ton of money in the long run. As for the 1/4 inch hardware, I've got tons and tons of adjacent pieces in this box. Washers, nuts, lock nuts, everything. But the most important piece of 1/4 20 hardware that I have in there are these nut certs, and I use them everywhere in this bus build. So all they are is a little barrel like that, and it has a thread on the inside and a flange on the top. You use a nut cert tool like that. It basically uses the same principle as a rivet tool, where you've got an anvil that the nut cert screws onto. You squeeze it down and it encapsulates the panel that you're putting the nut cert into. So it squishes down like that. So this side here squishes down. It's got a knurl on it, so it bites down onto that material and it holds itself in place. So on really thin material like this aluminum that we're using in the bus, I can put a thread into that aluminum without having to drill and tap it, because there's just no way that we'd be able to get a thread to bite into that. So these are absolutely amazing. And to go along with them, I've had a little bit of a problem with them over the years. So they've got that little flange on the top, which is great for holding it in the material. And I can't just cut it off, but if I want 2 panels to fit completely flush against each other, we have to find a way to recess that flange down into the material. So I created this dimple die. It's a male and a female die, like that. It's really rough. I just made them quickly. But what you do is you drill a 1/4 inch hole in the material. That allows a 1/4 inch piece of hardware to drop down into the material and align everything. One side's threaded, one side just has a pass-through that is also a 1/4 inch. Those 2 pieces screw together and clamp the material in between them. Now I use an impact driver and drive that down until everything is flush and drawn together, and it gives me a recess in the material that is the same distance or the same thickness as the head of our nutsert. So that allows everything to sit nice and flush, and we can get a good seal, especially in an area like our radiator ducting where we want all of that hot air to pass through it and go right out underneath the bus. We need to fight all of the little gaps and misalignments that we have in the panels. So we need everything to fit right, and that is the solution to that. In addition to using nuts and bolts and nutserts, we're also going to be using an assortment of rivets in this project. These are a super cool countersunk rivet, and that's probably too small. See, it's focusing on my face. How about that? No luck there. Anyway, I'll just describe to you what's going on. So, with a normal pop rivet, this would go into a blind hole, and it's got a dome on the side that you would see. I don't like the dome on the side that you're going to see because it sticks out. This countersunk rivet goes into a countersunk hole, and it sits completely flush with the top of the material, so it gives everything a really nice finished appearance. I'm going to be using these on the trim side of the radiator that's going to seal to the door of the bus. So when the door closes, it'll have like a bulb gasket around it, and I need to build pieces of aluminum that are going to go from the radiator out to the door to seal everything up really nice. Since you're going to see it, I want to use these guys. I've also created this tool to go along with them, and I know all of this stuff, the dimple die, the countersinking tool, all of that stuff is available, but if you're crafty enough and you're not willing to wait, you will eventually build something that you need. And this is exactly what I've done here. So this tool has two dies. Let me get out of the way. How about that? Nope. How about that? There we are. So this tool has two dies. It's got a male and a female die. On the male side, there is a little dowel coming out of there that has a countersink on the back end of it. And on the female side, it's got the same kind of situation. It's just a hole with a countersink on it. So those two pieces fit together perfectly. You drill an 1/8 inch hole, you clamp this on it, and flange that material down, and you've got a perfect countersink that makes this rivet sit perfectly flush with the top of the material. Now these are absolutely awesome. I had no idea they existed, and I've used them a ton in the last year on some of our race car projects. Since we're on the topic of rivets, let's talk about solid rivets. So that right there is a solid aluminum rivet with a domed head on it. Now back in the 1960s, 1950s, 1940s, most heavy-duty vehicle construction was done with a solid rivet instead of a nut and a bolt because they were so cheap to produce, they were easy to put together, and they worked incredibly well. So in our bus, we have a ton of solid rivets in the exterior. I had to cut a few of them out in order to redo the engine bay and redo some of the inner structure in there, and I needed to put some back in place. So I ordered a bunch of these aluminum solid rivets in a bunch of different lengths, and they've actually been really awesome. I've never used the solid rivet before this, but they look really cool and they're actually really easy to install. So you'd use like an air hammer with an anvil on the end of it that matches the dome of the rivet, and you'd back it up on the other side with a bucking bar, which is just a hardened piece of steel, and the motion of the air hammer would actually beat against the bucking bar on the back side, and it would create a mushroom on the back side of this piece, which would draw the two panels together. So I've done that kind of up in the two corners of the engine bay to attach the upright posts that you see in there. There's two upright posts, and there's like a attachment point that you can't see up inside of the engine bay, and all of that is attached with solid rivets. So I think that just about encompasses all of the hardware that we've used in our build and some of the custom tools that I've made. Thank you guys so much for checking out this section of the video. Let's move on to working on the bus. Alright, so here's where we left off last week. I've got all of the panels complete for our radiator ducting, and I have quite a bit of prerequisite work to do before we can get this top panel fitting permanently. So let me pull that panel out of the way and I'll show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. So what I want to do in the engine bay is actually get all of the flanges around the edge fitting correctly before we get the top piece on here and fasten it to everything. So we've got some overhang here, we've got a step in this piece that needs to sit flush. So both pieces of material need to sit flush on this flange. So I need to cut this away so that our main panel that's in the bus sits flush with this, and the top cover will sit flush with that. It might not make a whole ton of sense right now, but it will once we get started. Now I also need something on the bottom edge here on the frame rail that we can attach the top cover to so that it's not just flopping around and vibrating. So let's get started on getting all of this stuff attached. I'll show you how the countersinking tool for the nutserts work, and we'll start putting some hardware and everything. Alright, so I've had a little bit of time to work on this thing. Let me show you guys what I've got done so far. So, the top flanges, where everything meets together, where that cover panel is going to sit, I wanted all of it to be flush. So in this top corner, I've notched the corner of this panel out so that this panel can sit inside of it. There's a notch in there as well for the step to sit down inside of that panel. So everything sits nice and flat in that corner. And in this corner, you can see, same deal there. Sits nice and flush. And that top panel, I've already test fit it once. It goes on there, it sits nice and flat. So, what I've got to do now is try to get these side panels attached to the radiator shroud. If I can do that, then I can locate the top panel, I can put some hardware in it and get everything permanently in place. Alright, so I'm just about to the point where I need to yard all of this junk out of the engine bay and start rough installing all of the hardware on the floor in the shop. The engine bay is pretty cramped, so I don't quite have enough room to get in there and do what I need to do in the bus. So I'm going to take it all out, set it all up on the floor, mock it all up, and get everything installed. So let's get started on that. That's not the right wrench. Well, that wasn't so bad at all. Getting pretty good at this after taking it in and out so many times. Real time, that was only about 6.5 minutes. Alright, so I know that the engine bay is a little bit cramped and it's kind of hard to see all of the parts and pieces and how they work together in the engine bay of the bus. So I've done a quick little drawing of an exploded view here. You can see the radiator shroud. That is basically the base at which all of the shroud or ducting pieces are going to attach to. So that bolts directly to the radiator. We've got the seal panel on the top that connects the radiator to these side panels, and it also trims out around the fan bracket. We've got the two side panels and the top cover piece. So this is our radiator and radiator shroud. The radiator shroud is going to be the base at which all of the other parts and pieces attach to. And I'm going to leave this attached to the radiator for now while I'm attaching all of the other pieces to it because it is pretty frickin' flimsy on its own. So I have one of the side panels of our radiator ducting installed on the radiator shroud. I've located each of the holes for each of the fasteners that's going to fasten this panel to the radiator shroud. What I'm going to do now is remove all of the clecos, remove this panel, drill all of these holes out to 1/4 inch, and I'm going to use the dimple die to dimple each of the holes so that we can install a nutsert. So here's a closer up look of what those nutserts look like installed, and the nice dimpled holes. Then if we check it out down the side, you can see that they sit completely flush with the holes. So I built these panels two different ways, two different styles of mounting. So the outside panel has a flange that just runs straight on past the side of the radiator shroud, and it attaches to the side like that. For the panel in the back, since we don't have enough room, it's right up against the bulkhead in the back of the bus. So for this panel, I've broken a flange over at 90 degrees here on this back edge, and it's gonna face mount right onto the face of the radiator shroud, just like that. So I'm basically just gonna rinse and repeat, do the same thing on this side that I did on the other side. I've got all of the mounting holes located and drilled at 1/8 of an inch right now. I'm gonna bring those up to 1/4 inch, dimple die all the holes, install all the nutserts, and then get the panel put on here. Okay, so before I install this last one, I'm going to go ahead and go in there and drill all of the rest of the holes for this top panel here, because I've got this one. It's going to have a nutsert in it that is 90 degrees to that, and I'm not going to be able to get my dimpling tool in there if I install that nutsert. So I'm going to go ahead and drill out this side, get everything prepped, get everything dimpled, and continue on with the fun. Well, I'll be the first one to tell you that we don't have quite enough distance from the edge of that piece in there, so I can't get this thing tucked all the way up into this corner. So what I'm going to do is just grind a flat on this so that we can push it all the way up in there. Alright, so I've got a flat ground on there, like that. So hopefully that'll give us enough clearance to get all the way up inside of this panel. We're gonna find out right now. Oh, maybe, just maybe. Oh yeah, there we go. And our battery's dead. If it's not one thing, it's something else. This one's also almost dead, so we'll see if we can at least get through this with this battery, hopefully. Seems to have more power. I like it already. I'm just about out of hardware. Now we're talking. So what did all of that just cost me? That was a lot of 1/4-inch hardware. It was 3.04 pounds of hardware at $4.79 a pound. So it was $14.56 for all of that. It's pretty freaking cheap for 3 pounds of 1/4-inch hardware. So now that we have those 3 pieces bolted in place, it's time to try and fit the top cover. Alright, so I've got all of the hardware in the top edge here. Check that out. I ended up putting 2 pieces of hardware in the corner because I needed this edge to pull itself down and kind of bridge that corner a little bit better. But it's looking pretty nice. I did get a little bit overzealous with the impact and I tore both of the corners. So I tore this side a little bit and I tore this side. This side's not so bad. See, just a little tiny tear in there. But I'll have to come back and weld those up at a later date. So what I'm doing right now, I've got this edge lined up really nice on both sides. That side fits great. This side is the side with a little bit of overhang on it. So you can see there, sticking out just a little bit. The bottom side is flush. So the bottom side's flush and then it progressively gets worse as it gets down to the back. So I've got everything clamped. I'm gonna come in here and just grind this off, grind it back flush to the side panel, and I'll pick you guys back up when it's ready to go back in the bus. So the reason I'm nut and bolting all of this together is just to keep everything in place while I drill all the holes to size. And then eventually all of this is gonna get taken out. I'll pull the top cover off and put all the nutserts in here, and then it'll go together like that. This one's really close to the edge. I don't know if that's gonna work. Try not to tear it in half. Oh boy. Like that. Just when you don't think it's gonna happen, it does, right? Oh boy. If I had a nickel. How does that look from over there? I can live with that. Let's put some nutserts in. Right, so I've got the radiator back in there already. Now you guys get to watch me fight the rest of it in place. First panel, and I already have to do some tuning up. So there's a nutsert that's actually factory on this thing that's coming through the bulkhead. So I put a little hole in this for that. Now that I've actually mounted everything solid, the hole is off by just a little bit. So I'm gonna go and open this up. Take two. When the wife calls, you have to answer, right? Okay, I've got the side panel in. I'm working on the top section now. Should go pretty quickly. There are 20 bolts in just this top cover alone, if anybody was counting. Alright, so that is all of the hardware installed in that piece. There's going to be more to come in the future, but for right now, that's everything that I care to put in there. It's pretty solid, and it's not going anyplace for right now. Let me show you guys what it all looks like. So, there it is. Got all the hardware in the top section there. It looks really nice. Got all the hardware down that back edge. I still need to secure this bottom edge somehow to the frame rail, and I need to secure this front piece down there on the bottom, because it's just gonna wiggle and make a bunch of noise otherwise. But I'm gonna call that finished for right now. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this week's episode. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. And if you do, don't forget to hit that notification bell so you get an alert every time I post a video. And as always, thanks for watching.